people say, you say this is devastating and these restaurants are going to go out of business. And they say, yeah, well, someone will come along and open another one. And like, really? But people put their whole life into this, right? So they don't say that about airlines, but they do say it about our industry where, again, the majority of our workers are low income. They are immigrants. They are women, they are people of color. They are the most vulnerable part of our society.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Almost daily, the American media are announcing 200,000 cases of COVID-19. That's daily. Everyone on the planet has been affected in some way by the pandemic, but it beggars belief to see our friends in the US and indeed in much of Europe, and what they're going through. With the closure of restaurants again in California and little to no support from the US government, what will happen to one of the most vibrant and rich hospitality sectors on the planet? Daniel Patterson is the chef and restaurateur behind Alta Group, which includes 2 Michelin star Croix in San Francisco, Alta Adams, and Adams Wine Shop in Los Angeles. He is credited as one of the sparks that ignited contemporary Californian cuisine. Daniel, you've done so many things, I can't actually list them all here, and your influence is almost immeasurable. How are you feeling about your incredible hospitality industry at the moment in the US?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on and for saying such nice things. And man, I just, no one's ever seen anything like this, obviously. All over the world, everyone is suffering. We in the United States have particularly been suffering from a lack of grown-up humans running our country. So, I think that's really exacerbated what was already a terrible, terrible pandemic. But for us in the hospitality industry, I think there's kind of 2 things. One is that obviously we are, as an industry, programmed to help people. We want to feed people, and so there's been so many instances of restaurateurs and chefs who have shut down their restaurant, who have lost everything showing up to feed people who have even less than they do. And that, I look at that and I think, wow, that really makes me proud to be part of this industry. The other side of that is you have an industry that's been, it's been devastated everywhere, and I really don't want to, say that we have been, the worst hit, but certainly amongst the industries that most rely on, well, we can't work from home, So, and I think part of the challenge for everyone has been the lack of leadership, which kind of has given a yo-yo sort of effect. You're closed. You're open, but you're not inside. Outside's open. Outside's not open anymore. Now do takeaway. Wait a minute. We're going to try inside again. Just kidding. We're not. And so meanwhile, we're all just like, you're getting a lot of the shrugging emoji going around, and also the kind of palm and face emoji, because we're just like, what do you want us to do?
You've had so many, as you say, like changes to regulations and shutting down again, and hospitality is renowned for really slim margins and sort of almost week-to-week cash flows. What sort of impact is this going to have if things don't change soon on the sector?
Well, it's already been devastating. Something like 100,000 restaurants have already shut down permanently.
Wow.
That's going to keep happening. And, it's a big number. We're a big country. But I think that from what I read in the news, they're going to come through with some kind of more stimulus. But what they're not doing is putting it in a form that's going to work for everyone. A loan distributed through the banks disadvantages certain sectors of our industry that we should actually be protecting even more, and instead of leaving them hanging out to dry. So a lot of the smallest restaurants who don't have access to capital, who do not have the deep relationships with banks, this is disproportionately businesses owned and run by women and people of color. The whole pandemic has really exacerbated the existing inequities in our country, and it's made it very clear that our government doesn't, or I should say, hasn't really cared about healing those. And like everyone, well, like 55% of the country, I'm very hopeful about the incoming administration and their commitment to our environment, to healing these deep wounds that we have in our country, which are really self-inflicted and self-perpetuating. But we can actually do something about it, and so that's I think our ray of hope.
Well, that ray of hope is really interesting because it's been a really devastating year, and it still is devastating. But the election recently, which I think the whole world was waiting on those results, like what was it like experiencing that as an American to see that unfold and have the result, such a positive result?
Oh my God. I mean, it was crazy, right? So it happens over several days. So like night number one, I go to bed just like depressed, like everyone else. And again, I say everyone else, but not everyone else, because 45% of the country voted for Trump, which is so extraordinary to me, and really speaks to very, very deep problems in this country. And then the next day, and then the day after, and then so they finally figure out that Biden's won by Saturday. And I was doing an event at Alta with the Los Angeles chef Naisha Arrington, and we met at the farmers market to talk about, and this is way back in the dark ages when we could still serve outside, and so we have a beautiful patio, and so we had a really amazing dinner. We met there the morning that Biden had been, that it had been called for Biden. And the atmosphere at the farmer's market was so joyful and light, and the sun came out, and everything was just like, it was like a magical moment. And then of course, the very next thing that happens is the idiot in chief, who is outgoing, thank God, decides that it was a stolen election and he's going to start fighting it. So then we've had to endure this prolonged temper tantrum. I don't know if you have children, you really, really recognize this. It's like when they don't want to leave, they're about 3 or 4 and they're just clinging to whatever that toy is they're playing with, and you have to pry it out of their hands, and all the other parents are looking at you like, get your kid in line. What the hell is wrong with you? And that's how I think about our president. Everyone else around the world is looking at us going, God damn, get some control on that guy. And so here we are. Now we've gone through this really archaic process, which leads to an election and then an electoral college. And it's put to bed. Even the Republicans are saying it's done. And dude's still out there going, no, it's not done yet. So it's been a very surreal process. And unfortunately, the chaos factor has kind of impeded on the joyfulness. But I think what everyone is noticing is a sense of, and when I say everyone, I mean just people in their right mind who are noticing that a president-elect gets up to speak and they don't cringe. It's like we're coming out of this abusive relationship. Every time Trump would open his mouth, we just like, oh my God, don't yell at us. Don't say anything bad, and so I think generally what we're going to see is a calming influence. and a positive and more grounded approach to addressing these very like catastrophic consequences that the pandemic has had on our entire society. So we're obviously talking about the restaurant industry. Now, when we're talking about the restaurant industry, we're talking about 11 million people who work in restaurants and 5 million people who are delivery drivers and work in meat plants and on farms. 16 million people, that's 5% of our country, and even more than that if you think about people who are actually in the workforce. That is an enormous part of our country. So one of the challenges that we've seen, and I don't know if you've seen it in other places, but people say, you say this is devastating and these restaurants are going to go out of business. And they say, yeah, well, someone will come along and open another one. And like, really? But people put their whole life into this, right? So they don't say that about airlines. They don't say that about car manufacturing companies, but they do say it about our industry where, again, the majority of our workers are low income. They are immigrants. They are women. They are people of color. They are the most vulnerable part of our society, and they are being left hung out to dry by our government and by our infrastructure yet again. And so the one thing, as we talk about, yes, it's sad to lose a restaurant, and I am sad that I've lost things, but I can go out and get another job. Like, I'm not worried, right? But that is not true for so many people who are living on the edge or in poverty, paycheck to paycheck. Protections for rental evictions are going to be coming due soon. And the human suffering aspect to this, I think, is the most awful part and the most heart-wrenching part, because it's true. More people will open restaurants. More people will invest in them. That's not really the biggest thing. It matters. Of course it matters. But what's even worse is that we are just not taking care of our people. These are citizens. They deserve the same love and respect and protection that anyone else has, and they're just not getting it, and that part of it has been absolutely heartbreaking.
How important has this sort of short period of time and that change of government been for the mental health of everyone in the US and particularly in the industry? Has it helped in the sense of hope?
Yes and no. I mean, of course, it provides some sense of hope, but like, it's gone so far that I can tell you from talking with all my friends, like my inbox, my text messages are full of just people who are fed up and exhausted, and they've been trying to they furlough people, rehire them, furlough people, rehire them. They keep trying to keep everyone motivated, trying to keep jobs. No one right now who owns a restaurant is thinking, I want to make money. I mean, sure, fast food restaurants, and there's a few outliers, but for the most part, we're like, we want to protect our team, and we want to have something for them when we come out of this. But we are in, I think, the most dangerous point. I think everyone's exhausted. I think mentally, emotionally, I think the mental health generally in our industry is always terrible, but right now it's worse than I've ever seen it. And from very strong and positive people, kind of really communicating some cracks in their, usually very upbeat personalities. And I've felt it, and I think that I've worked very hard for myself and my own life to to really just focus on being grateful and to accept what I have and not really focus on what I don't have. And even so, like, this has been an extraordinary moment for everyone to engage with. So I think we're not, because the cases are so high, because the deaths are so high, because all of our hospitals are still full and the vaccine is still a couple months away, I think it's going to be a few more months before people really start feeling truly hopeful. Sorry, that was depressing.
Well, let's look at something that is really quite beautiful. And although, some of the world sees American food through the fast food chains that are spread out across the globe, but for those lucky enough to venture to the US, it's an extraordinary and rich culinary landscape. And you've been a massive part of the Californian culinary landscape. Can you tell us a bit about Californian contemporary food and the way you have delivered that in your restaurants?
I moved to California when I was very young, about 30 years ago in 1989. And when I first moved out, I was very lucky to meet and work with and eat the food of some of the people who were part of the the first wave, the Shapenese movement, the Judy Rogers and Alice Waters, and so many really amazing cooks that were refocusing the attention of the food on the ingredients and on the importance of how the environment and how the animals are treated and how that plays into deliciousness. And I opened my first restaurant in 1994. I was 25 and I knew absolutely nothing, kind of like every 25-year-old. And I still pretty much know nothing. But then, wow, but I was in Sonoma, which is about an hour or so north of San Francisco. It's next to Napa, but very different. It's more agricultural. And back in 1994, it was very sleepy in the sense that people who were more high-powered, looking for that extravagant wine country experience as we think of it now, would go to Napa. Napa was the slick and fancy place, and Sonoma was more like overalls and down to earth. And so for some reason, I decided to go there and open a fancy restaurant. Because if there's one thing I've proven is that I have just no sense when it comes to choosing locations. So it was interesting. I mean, we did many things that I thought were really hard, but they were something that I stuck to. Like, for example, we had a service charge, and everyone made the same. And this is 1994. No one was talking about that. And that was something that I think really helped foster a sense of family and kind of togetherness in what was a very small restaurant. We had 30 seats in our fancy dining room, and then we had a little cafe out front, which was really for the locals, and for people who didn't want to spend a lot of money. And we had grilled cheese sandwich and roast chicken, and I'm still friends with people who worked there from the day we opened until the day we closed. And it was really special, and I learned a lot from the farmers who were nearby, who grew and raised the animals and the vegetables. And what I learned and what I took away and what I felt was so powerful about California cuisine is this sense of freshness. Always, for me, lightness, always did a lot with vegetables. And that was kind of my kind of start in understanding California cuisine was from, I think, what was coming out of a tradition that was very powerful. And, I left there. I opened a place in the city called Elizabeth Daniel, which was fancier, but I kind of got away from the farmers markets and the farm a little bit. And I felt like that closed after 9/11. It just couldn't, that area, it just couldn't make it. And when I went to open Qua, which was 2006, I spent a lot of time thinking about how, I was from the other side of the country originally. And sometimes I felt like I was still kind of a stranger in California. And I thought, what could I do to bring myself closer to the land and to the place, and in turn to bring my cooking closer to the people who live there? What can I do that's really focused towards the people who actually live there? Because I feel like, that's where food is most successful. So, it really came out of that searching. Plus, I had met someone whose mother was worked in a lot of areas in the Sierras and in kind of very sparsely populated areas, going through walks and her showing me some of the edible plants and some of the things that I hadn't really been able to see before, and starting to think, what is it that I could say using some of these ingredients that really weren't available. And I knew that I had to do something different. And well, anyway, that was never really hard because I was always kind of an outlier, and no matter what, I was going to do something different. But I really wanted to do something that wasn't represented, and also and then also like 4 months before we opened, I wrote a story in the New York Times saying that maybe we could have a little more imagination in our cooking, and which went over, I would say, well and not so well in some ways. It was controversial because everything was very locked into a certain way of looking at things. So I was very conscious of, I wanted to do something that was really focused on creativity and expression, and that was generous in its in an emotional sense. Something that was that we put a lot of effort into, and that was really genuine and honest. And when we opened, and by the way, Qua is next to a strip club. I was once on stage with someone, and they were asking me a question when the Qua book came out. It was like 7 years ago, and they said, "Well, what is it that's really unique about your restaurant that you've done?" And so I joked, we're the only 2 Michelin star restaurant next to a strip club, which I do think is still true. But it was also a terrible location, but it was a very freeing location, because I think a lot of what we did was to try and take the symbols of fine dining and scramble them a little bit, so that we did a lot of things like, instead of Bernardo, we used handmade pottery. We work with a lot of wild ingredients. We had one menu, which no one was doing at that time, and mostly vegetables, kind of this combination of modern and ancient technique, kind of a less formal approach to service, and the non-tablecloth and all of that. And I guess, maybe I got lucky, hit a zeitgeist that kind of resonated with people. And also I will say that, the one thing I'm so proud of about Qua is the people who work there. Extraordinary people. Like, I think, all up and down the West Coast, you see so many of the best restaurants, from Coquine and Portland, and also Berlou and Saboteur Bakery in Seattle, and Rich Table and Commis and Taco Maria in Orange County and LA. I mean, so many people that work there contributed, and there was a real sense of purpose. And it was a very crazy, chaotic time because we tried a lot of things. We took a lot of risks. We failed a lot. And at one point, I think my sous chefs had to sit me down and say, okay, you cannot change more than 2 things on the menu in one day. I'm like, okay, sure. I get it. It's too much. And I swear to God, the next week I come in, I'm like, okay, we're going to change this and this and this. And they look at me, I'm like, no, I swear to God, I've got this totally dialed in. And of course, one of the 3 dishes was a disaster. But because of, I think because of the people, because of the sense of discovery and the sense of love for the kind of the cooking process for each other, for what we were doing, in a real genuine kind of effort to connect with our area, it just kind of forged something new. And so I think I would say, it feels really special to look back at that moment in time. And I feel great. I look around the Bay Area and I see so many ways in which we were able to kind of be a part of other people's, way of doing things, so that was really kind of what that story is about. And now, my question is, okay, what's next? And that's the story that remains to be written,
You're not only one of the major influences from a culinary perspective, but you've also focused on how the restaurant industry distributes opportunity and those that are disadvantaged and people of colour in the industry. What has been the challenges in tackling that? Because you've really taken that head on.
I mean, some stuff we've done has been amazing. Some stuff was a disaster. And I think how do I put this? I didn't always choose good risks, and I think sometimes I could be more optimistic about people and situations, and my seeing the best in things. I think sometimes creates more challenge, but I think that when I look at what we've done, for example, we worked with a nonprofit called Rock United for over 3 years to develop a racial equity program, which is really designed to remove implicit bias from how people hire and train and advance, so that everyone has the same chance of success. And during the shutdown, one of the founders of Rock went to found One Fair Wage, which, as the name says, is really about they're tackling the minimum wage, which across the country, and this is, a lot of people in other countries don't know this, but it's really extraordinary that the minimum wage is like $2.50, $3, $3.50 in most of the country. In 42 states, they have what they call a tip credit. They say, we're going to pay you this minimum amount, but we're going to assume that your tips will take you up to the minimum. And study after study has shown that this is regressive. It falls, most heavily on, if you look at the servers across the country, they mostly don't work in fine dining. They work in Denny's and fast food restaurants and diners. And what this does is it leaves them vulnerable to abusive situations through their managers, through their customers. It creates more inequality, and not only that, it puts more pressure on the public support system. Welfare benefits, for example. The amount of fast food workers who are also on welfare is extraordinary because these giant corporations are just not paying people properly. So that's been their focus. And I called her and I said, what if people use their shutdown restaurants to feed out of work people? And she said and we weren't the only people that had this idea, but the different thing about our program, which is called High Road Kitchens, is that she said, okay, great, but those restaurants have to commit to paying at least $15 an hour which is no big deal in California because we're already either at or above that. But in most of the country, it is a big deal. And they have to agree to participate in this racial equity program, which starts with assessing how well a place is really doing and how much opportunity they're really creating at the higher level jobs for everyone. And then once you assess, you say, well, we've got some stuff we can work on, and then here's how you can work on it. So that program started in California. It's now in, I think, New York and maybe 4 or 5 other cities. It's in Boston. I think they're doing it in Chicago and Detroit. And what's incredible about it is that it's the local governments are seeing the benefit of businesses that prioritize how more equality and hiring and promoting, because it makes for a better society. It addresses through the private sector problems that honestly, government should be dealing with, and they're not. And so they're starting to fund restaurants that are just doing things better, which is amazing. So, I think a lot of these problems that we have can be addressed in different ways, and one of those ways is through government support. And we've seen, especially this year, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and all of the protests and all of the raised awareness of how much our society needs to change. We're seeing local governments wanting to support restaurants who are interested in doing this work. And so that's very different and really a profound shift that I'm excited about.
A little earlier, you mentioned that right now for you, it's about what's next. Has this year changed the way you perceive your role in the industry and what you want to do? And do you have an idea of what might come in the coming year for you?
Oh man, I'm trying to figure that out. Do you have any advice? So in 2015, I stepped down from Qua. I brought in Matt Kirkley, who did a great job, and I just, I was. So I have a nonprofit called the Cooking Project, and it started about 10 years ago. And it teaches kids, mostly inner city kids, basic cooking skills. Because a lot of kids grow up in households where they don't even know they've never seen a head of cabbage. I mean, of like cauliflower or something, and they don't know how to feed themselves well. And what you eat and your mental health are so linked, your physical and mental health. And so we worked with a nonprofit that took in kids from the street and kind of got them back on their feet, called Larkin Street Youth Services in San Francisco. And that's how the Cooking Project started. And we had different chefs come, and we turned it into a curriculum, and we work with different schools. And, we did a lot of different kinds of work, but that was really where I started to see the enormous difference between the access to good food that myself, my customers had, and a lot of people coming out of more low-income backgrounds. And so by 2015, I just kind of had reached a point where I felt like I'd done everything I could do at Qua. I felt like I was kind of burned out. It was a lot of years of working 100-hour weeks. And so, I wanted to do some other things. And I just wanted some time away. I just didn't want to cook fancy food. And so I did some other things. And I think one thing that I'm excited to do is to get back into, cooking, for lack of a better word, fancy food again. But to do it in a slightly different way. So partly I'm thinking about that because I don't want to do the same thing I did before. I think, I don't know, just for me, like once I've done it, I don't want to do it again, which was the strength of Qua and also our our weakness. I'll never forget the director from Michelin coming in like 2009 when there were no, I guess, or right in the beginning. And he told me like, he's like, you'd have 3 stars if you didn't change your menu so much. And if you didn't, take so many chances, like you don't have the consistency, because there are big things about consistency. And I really, wow, like for me at that time, especially, I think I had more bound up in people's opinion of me and in ratings. And I thought, wow, I really just blew it because like, I'm just not programmed that way. I would rather try something new and fail than do the same thing I did yesterday and succeed. And because that moment of discovery, like for me, it's like the times where we weren't pushing in the kitchen, the food just kind of felt like it missed something, like it enervated. It was like, just wasn't, I don't know, the whole thing just wasn't right. So maybe it's just kind of how I am, but like I never want to do the same thing I've done before. So the question of what's next is not just a question for me, it's a question for everyone, But for me personally, I think there's some evolution of style that I'm kind of excited to explore. And I love Alta Adams, and I think we've done a really good job with Keith Corbin, who's the chef here, partner in crime, and kind of managed to get us through this time, and we've tightened stuff up, and now we're going to open a little fast casual spin-off called Luella's Cali Soul. It's going to be Keith's place. I'm going to help him. And so like projects like that are really exciting. Kind of bringing the cooking project down to Los Angeles, that's really exciting to me. And I think that once everything does reopen, there's going to be kind of a burst of energy. And the question is, how can we harness it, and how can we direct it in a way that feels positive and loving and supportive? And that's something that I think about all the time.
Well, we're fast approaching a new year, and you'll have a new government and a new leader. Well, what are your hopes for the coming year?
I hope that we, as a country, as a society, can find more kindness in ourselves and more openness to each other, to see the places where we are more similar than different, and maybe I hope for leadership that can value our shared humanity, because I think that that's the ultimate dividing line. You either believe in our shared humanity or you don't. And if you don't, I don't even know how to talk to you, So we have become so constricted in this country by antagonism and hatred. And we've become so set into all of the ways in which other things, other people, other groups, other ways of thinking are just wrong. And so what I hope for is, this is going to sound, I don't know, super hippie and new age, but more love and more kindness and more compassion and more acceptance of ourselves and of each other. And I think that that's the only way that we can start to heal a lot of the wounds that we have.
Well, I couldn't agree with that anymore. Daniel, we're honoured to have you on Deep in the Weeds to not only share your story, but a real glimpse into what it's like in the US at the moment. Good luck in the coming year, and please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.